Hello everybody, I am Jared Ross, the Genie Vlogger, and welcome back to another Professional Genealogist Reacts. On today's video, I will be reacting to two DNA tests, two different results, uncovering my ancestry and surprising heritage by Ace. Now this is a channel I am not familiar with. This channel seems to be a travel channel and the host seems to be from an African-American ancestry. Couldn't find a whole lot necessarily going in depth into his ancestry, but this is a 45-minute video, so it's gonna be a long one, and I'm guessing he's probably gonna go in depth, especially showing two different DNA tests. So the big hope is that he's gonna show his DNA matches, maybe even solving some family mysteries or confirming stuff with those matches. Now, of course, a lot of people watch these for the percentages, so just to mention that real quickly, if he is coming from a typical African-American ancestry, we're going to expect probably about 80 to 90% African, 10 to 20% European, and maybe a little bit of Native American, something like that. If he's coming from something more than just a typical African-American ancestry, so maybe he has part of a Creole ancestry, or maybe he has Afro-Caribbean or Afro-Latino ancestry, we're going to expect a different nuance of things going on. So if it's coming from a more Caribbean sort of ancestry, we may see a difference with that European, as well as there's sometimes a higher likelihood of an indigenous aspect to it, but that varies depending on the place. But enough rambling, let's just go ahead and jump into the video.
Today I will be talking about my experiences using two different DNA tests, one from my ancestry and the other one is from 23andMe. Today I also want to highlight something these DNA tests don't really tell you, so you know what to expect regardless of where you're from, all right? Which prompts me to why I'm actually showing you my results, because I actually took this test a year ago, but something happened 3 weeks ago or so that made me want to share this with you. So basically, when you do these particular tests, you actually start getting connected to what is considered distant relatives, people who actually share your same DNA. On the website, they call it matches, and they actually give you the ability to DM, direct message these people. Don't worry, if you don't want to receive the message, you don't have to receive it if someone's trying to contact you. For the most part, sometimes you might see, oh yeah, that's my cousin, but someone contacted me that I didn't know who that person was, and then they actually asked me questions about, do I know this particular name? This person wanted to know more about this particular name because it's actually their grandmother. I didn't know the name, but I told them that, I would just check with my mom and see what's up. Long story short, that's actually my mom's auntie, okay? My grandma's sister.
We're not even 2 minutes into this video, already talking about DNA matches, the power of the DNA matches, the basic idea of genetic genealogy. His cousin found him as a DNA match, sent, whatever information about, I think we're connected because of this. Does this sound familiar? All he had to do for his research was ask his mom and she confirmed it. But for the more in-depth genetic genealogy where you really utilize these tests, you can do the research for matches by looking at their family tree, looking at your family tree, and expanding out and trying to find, are there similarities? Whether it's similarities of names, whether it's similarities of locations, or sometimes maybe even similarities of a certain community that both of them have. So maybe both of them are coming from, let's say Volga German ancestry, or let's say they're both for African American connection coming from a Gullah Geechee community. That could be indicative of how they're connected. And so that's just kind of how genetic genealogy works. Is you do a DNA test, you look at your DNA matches, you figure out how distant you'd expect to be related, and that's how you use the percentage of how much you're related, or the centimorgans is the measurement they use. So kind of if you think of like a centimeter, a centimorgan is just a measurement of DNA. So you just use that to figure out, okay, if I share 100 centimorgans with someone, you have a certain amount of ways you may be related based on that.
Long story short, a couple of days later, I started receiving pictures from distant relatives who happen to be Dominican. Just to remind you guys, I am Haitian American from both sides of my family.
So like I said in the beginning, not coming from an African American ancestry, we're not going to expect that typical 80 to 90% African and 10 to 20% European. That's a typical African American reading. If he's coming from a Haitian and a Dominican ancestry, then that's going to mean that we're probably going to see indigenous American. And then in terms of the balance of European versus African, it's going to be somewhat different. Now, I don't know what it is in the various specific communities, but I think the most important thing that I want to see in terms of his testing is the quality of his DNA matches, because the quality of your matches are people from your population groups testing on these sites is important, because if you don't have a lot of people from your population group testing, it's going to be a lot more difficult to make use of this genetic genealogy wise. But he has a lot of close relatives who've tested, which could be an indication that he has a lot of family who then came to areas that do a lot of these DNA tests, or these DNA tests are commonly done amongst these populations. So a great example for why a lot of people will do MyHeritage as a DNA test is because MyHeritage's database has a very large representation from South America and a large representation from Eastern Europe that's not found on a lot of the other sites. So while he's comparing 23andMe and Ancestry in this video, if he's watching this video of mine, I would also suggest you upload to MyHeritage. You don't have to test with them. You can just upload your raw data and see what your match list looks like there, because I'd be very interested to see, do you find a lot more relatives of yours who still live in those areas your family came from, or are they largely from an American sort of, they immigrated to America or something like that. So that's kind of what I'd be kind of curious about.
Which is one of the reasons why I wanted to share this results with you, is because as human beings, we are more connected than some may think. Now, I said I was going to share another story with you. Now, this is from my sister, co-worker. She said one day she was just, curious about her DNA heritage. So she did one for her and her mother. When the results came back, it showed that her mother was not her mother. She couldn't believe it, so she did another test with another company, and it showed the same results. Her mom was not her mom. But this time around, it actually connected her with another woman as her mother. And so she was shocked to find out this information. So she reached out to the woman and told the woman wasn't really believing it. And so this woman also had a daughter, but this particular daughter was super successful.
Switched at birth sort of situation. I bet the other daughter tests. Okay,
It was determined to find out the truth. So she took the test, and it finds out that they were separated and switched at birth in Cuba. The rich daughter still keeps in contact with her biological mother, but vice versa, it's the mom is not trying to keep in contact with her daughter, the other way around. It's one of those sad stories about DNA tests that you have to consider as well. But
a big part of DNA testing that a lot of genetic genealogists will harp on for people that are just testing for the first time is understand what you might uncover. You might uncover stories like this. You might uncover something even worse. You just never know. And so it's one of those things that I think a lot of people hear that and they kind of think, okay, yeah, it wouldn't happen to me. And then the people that it happens to, it's like almost always like, oh my God, I didn't even think about it. But definitely something to consider. If you have not done a DNA test and you want to do it, understand what you may uncover is something that you're not going to be happy about or may cause more issues in the family, unfortunately. But for the majority of people, you're probably just going to find that it confirms what you already know.
So with that being said, on a brighter note, I'm here to announce that I want to get in contact with as many distant relatives that I can. These websites give me the ability to contact so many different relatives, and I would love to get in contact with them.
I would suggest you do a technique we call cousin bait. What is cousin bait? It's where you put your family tree on as many family tree websites as possible. Make a tree on Ancestry, make a tree on MyHeritage, make a family tree on Family Search, make a family tree on Genie.com, make a family tree on WikiTree, make a family tree on GenieNet, and upload your DNA to all of the various websites that allow it. MyHeritage, Family Tree DNA, Living DNA, GEDmatch. And so that's the general idea of just kind of the more bait, in a sense, you put out, the higher the likelihood a cousin will get onto that bait and be like, I need to contact my cousin. So if that's your goal, which that was always my goal in the beginning, and I've contacted literally thousands of cousins of mine all across the world. Last year, I did a big trip to London and Amsterdam where I ended up meeting a ton of cousins, and I even made this family tree, which I'm going to show on screen, that shows how I connect to all of the cousins that I met on this trip in London and Amsterdam. And I've literally connected with thousands, if not tens of thousands of relatives all across the world on literally every continent.
And even the white ones. You know what I'm talking about. I definitely want to film a series about that. I'm currently in London with a lot of my relatives. They live here, distant relatives. They live here.
I have a feeling Ace and I need to connect because that is something I have been trying to get people to do for a long time. A lot of people are familiar with my YouTuber Family Tree series, where I've already worked with a bunch of YouTubers in helping them learn about their family history. One thing I've always wanted to do is have YouTubers that I find that family history and then they go and meet cousins. Ace, if you're watching this, we definitely need to connect. We need to come up with something because that would be so much fun. I'd love to help you. This is my specialty. This is my specialty.
With that being said, let's get into me showing you my DNA. Let's go. Yo. All right, guys, we're going to start off with my ancestry right here. I'm blocking out my name for obvious reasons. But anyways.
So before he jumps into it, I'm not 100% sure if this is the most recent update of Ancestry. I'm actually going to see, this is from 5 days ago, so it could be. But basically, Ancestry just did a big update on their results. What happens is over time, as they find more and more information and have more people test, they figure things out to a much higher understanding, and so they adjust the results, and so as time goes on, people's results change. So I believe what he's looking at are the most recent results. I'm pretty sure because it even says right there next to it, new. So yeah.
Let's look at the information. So it's basically breaking everything down to percentage when it looks at my DNA, with the most percentage being from Benin and Togo. Yo! Now, I'm not really good with...
And you can see, I mean, Benin and Togo is right there on the screen, and you can see that this is kind of the typical West African, Sub-Saharan, West African readings that you get for a lot of people with African ancestry throughout the Americas. Most of the Africans who were enslaved and brought to the Americas came from West Africa, and obviously kind of these areas, you know, Benin, Togo, Nigeria.
It says Benin and Togo, which is in this particular area right here, where it's the darkest, if anything, right there.
So one of the issues that a lot of folks have with the DNA tests, which it kind of is understandable with how we understand the world today, is just that the DNA test population groups they define doesn't necessarily fall in with the tribal groups that were historically in these various areas. And so it kind of cuts out some of that nuance. But a big part of that is just in the understanding of the general consumer, which is this is what it's aimed at. They want to make it as simple and digestible as possible while trying to still at least convey as much information as possible. It's this fine balance act of giving enough but not giving too much that people make bad assumptions from it, which happen all the time with these DNA tests. When it gets this reading, it says Benin and Togo, and that's where you see the brightest amounts of it, but as you see it gets further out, it's not quite as bright, just kind of indicating it could be coming from these other areas as well. Just, you know, the majority of where we're finding this DNA is largely in population groups of people that their ancestry comes from these areas. So in reality, it's not necessarily he has 25% ancestry from Benin and Togo. It's really saying that he has 25% of his DNA that's correlating to the people that have been tested that Ancestry is defining as Benin and Togo population.
What you can do, I'm not going to go through this, but you can actually like read some information about the place right here, which I really do enjoy. It also can break down the ethnic groups in the area. So as you can see right here.
Interesting. So this must be part of the new stuff that they've rolled out, because I don't know if I've seen this before. But basically this seems to be trying to solve that issue that I was just saying that a lot of people have, and that it doesn't look at the tribal affiliations and those sorts of regions versus what it is today, whereas this is kind of actually breaking that down. Now, how accurate this sort of stuff is, I'm not quite sure with this part, the ethnic groups, but this will be something as time goes on, hopefully we'll learn. So got to dive into that white paper.
It says Aja, That's an ethnic group here, and it highlights where you can find these particular groups here. Scroll down, it also tells you more about my parents and what percentage of my parents I get this particular DNA from. So from both sides of my parents, I get this DNA from parent 1, it's 21%, and from parent 2, it's 4%, and they add that together, and I got 25%.
Now, here I should just say that this part, the side view as they call it technically, but parent 1 and parent 2, that is just an estimation. So it's not for sure. What they're doing here is a form of what's known as autophasing. And phasing is just where you take your DNA and you compare it to one of your parents so that you can identify exactly what part of each piece of DNA, what spot of DNA you're getting from that parent. Because remember, each spot of DNA is a base pair. One part from mom, one part from dad, but they can't tell which part's from mom and which part's from dad. So for a lot of these tests, they have various tools that do an autophase sort of thing to try to help that. And that's what they're doing here. They don't call it mom or dad because they can't even tell if it is mom or dad at best. They just say, well, we think this is from one of the parents and the other part is from the other parent. So they do that kind of a breakdown, and this is coming from what's known as the side view tool. So it doesn't call it side view here, but the side view shows the entire breakdown. So it'll show, parent 1, what are you getting from them? Parent 2, what are you getting from them? But in my experience, while it is fairly good at doing, getting it right, I have seen a lot of them that you can definitely tell right off the bat, something's off here. But that makes sense because it's very difficult to do auto-phasing sort of techniques.
They don't show it on the map, but they say these people traveled, like based off of my DNA, it seems like my match is a lot of people from Haiti.
So what he just talked about here in terms of the Haiti reading, this is coming from the community regions. Basically what they do is they take a look at your DNA matches and they look to see, of all of his DNA matches that are also getting Benin and Togo, what are some common locations that they're listing for their family tree? Because with Ancestry, when you do your DNA test, you can connect it into the family tree you build. So for all the people that have done that are matching him, they look at it and they see, oh, a ton of them are getting Haiti, and thus they've been able to identify, okay, this is connected most likely to Haiti based on your relatives. So it even says your connection to this region may come from relatives who also connect you to this ancestral journey. Well, you are getting this community, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have that community in your ancestry all the time. But in my experience, most of the time when you get these communities, you usually are coming from those communities, but things can get thrown off. So let's say that maybe, 200 years ago, you had a third great grandparent who had a sibling that moved to Haiti, and then they ended up having like a dozen kids who then had a dozen kids, and then they had all these kids, and next thing you knew, there were literally, thousands, if not tens of thousands of descendants in Haiti just from this sibling of your third great grandparent. But your side, your third great grandparent didn't go to Haiti like their sibling, they went to the US. And so you may get that reading because if you have thousands of cousins in Haiti who are coming from, this third great grandparent's sibling, a lot of them may share that DNA with you, and thus this reading could get skewed.
So let's move on to the next place. All right. Central West Africa, 18%. Baby, what's up? Central, what's up, Central?
So basically
Africa?
the general same
Everything
area.
in blue. So that
Same general
includes
area.
Benin, Togo, Ghana. It says right here, your ancestry region estimates it's about 18%, but it could range from 11 to 21%.
That whole 11 to 21% is just giving a range to give you a better idea of the nuance of what's going on. Could be as high as 21 whatever percent, 21%, could be as low as 11%, but based on everything that they can see, their best estimate would be 18%, but it's still a range.
Ivory Coast, 13%, son. Ivory Coast. It's in that same area, actually. It's interesting how they break everything down, but so now it goes even further to Sierra Leone, Ivory Coast area, Liberia, so that's really interesting right there.
This is actually kind of similar to what I see with a lot of the Jewish readings, where it'll give you various readings, like, it'll give you a, Romanian, Ukrainian, Moldova, Jewish, and then Germanic, low country Jewish, and then, all these other Jewish. But when you look at them, they generally almost all overlap each other with just little bit of slight differences between all of them.
Western Bantu people, 12%. So this is something I want to highlight, right? I'm all over the map in terms of Africa. And one of the reasons why I feel like I am, and you can correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section, is because of the transatlantic slave trade and what happened with the enslaved people that came to the Western Hemisphere.
100% agree. The biggest thing to think about being that, once they came over, part of the whole system was stripping away their identity. And with that came their, ancestral origins. And so it's not like all of these people back then that were, enslaving Africans were like, I'm only going to take Africans from this area, from this tribe, or, they were getting them from wherever they could. Obviously a very disgusting history, but just, it's part of the history, and especially something to consider when people with this ancestry are looking at their ancestry. And so I 100% agree, because, he probably has ancestors that may have been in the Americas as early as the 1600s, maybe even earlier, having come with the Spanish in some way. I don't know that history 100%. From what I remember, there were a lot of Africans that were part of those voyages. So if he has ancestry tracing back hundreds of years, it certainly would lend to possibility that his family would be a large mixture of people coming from various African tribes that came over in various waves of being enslaved because of the transatlantic slave trade.
What they used to do to the enslaved people, they used to mix them. They would never keep tribes together. They would break them up. So they would have different types of enslaved people from different tribes working together. After mixtures and generations, my DNA is a byproduct of that. I could be wrong, guys. If you're from Africa and you have similar DNA, let me know. I could be wrong, no problem. But I feel like that was a byproduct of that. And I think that also happens to a lot of European people who live in America, who have a European background. You have this all mixed because of your family's mixing in America as well.
Same exact thing, 100% agree. It is exactly the same thing, just kind of in a different way, in a sense of just, you have all of these various people of different European backgrounds coming together, and then over hundreds and hundreds of years, the ancestries that they had weren't that important, and so you had a lot of mix of people from different European ancestries, and same thing with people of African ancestry who were enslaved.
Next one is, I am 6% Nigerian. Let's go. What's up, Nigeria? We have Cameroon in the building. So that's basically, if you can see, guys, it's like I'm all over this area right here.
The typical Western sub-Saharan African areas that I think most people find.
All right. Mali is in the building. I got some Mali in my life, baby. All right. I got some Germanic people is in the building. Some Germanic people. So this is the white. This is the white side.
And we're getting 4%. The thing that we need to consider here is we need to look at the entire breakdown he'll end up getting, because especially if he's getting populations in Europe related to Germanic Europe, whether it's Eastern Europe or Northwestern Europe, Germanic Europe's tied to most of Europe, really. So whatever European he gets, we can kind of take it and estimate that that's likely coming from one or two ancestors. Obviously, it could be coming from more, but basically the most recent ancestor being that distance. So at 4%, if this is the only European that he gets, then that would be the equivalent of about a third great-grandparent, meaning maybe someone born in the early 1800s, could be late 1700s, could be mid 1800s, but generally that's kind of what I see for people of my age group. But if we end up seeing a bit more percentages of other European, we could possibly estimate that a little bit closer, and maybe it could be a second great-grandparent or a great-grandparent. And of course, even at 4%, doesn't mean it could only be a third great-grandparent, but that's the most likely. Still could be closer as a second, maybe even further as a fourth great-grandparent. And we could possibly identify that European ancestor through genealogy eventually. Of course, it could be that he may have multiple European ancestors. So, looks on his dad's side and maybe has one or two, looks on mom's side, has one or two there as well through different lines, maybe even at different distances of ancestry. So maybe a fourth great grandparent on mom's side and maybe two fifth great grandparents on dad's side from different lines or whatever. Because when it comes to these DNA tests, it's generalized, it's an estimation. We need to understand that, kind of like we often get those ranges, like the, here Germanic Europe could be a range of 1 to 4%.
This is the white side of the family. All right, we got Portugal in the mix.
I would assume that the Portugal is partly coming from the fact that he's coming from that Dominican and Haitian ancestry. I don't know if I would expect Portuguese readings as much with most African Americans. Obviously, there were a lot of Portuguese in the US, and I'm sure a lot of them did have slaves during the time that slavery was allowed in the US. But in my experience, I don't find Portugal as a reading as much. I do, Iberian does come up now and again. It seems a little unexpected in my estimation. So very, very interesting. And then adding that with the Germanic, now we're at 8% European so far.
Ireland, which is a place I want to visit. Shout out to my people, the luck that are Irish. Senegal, I'm 1%. Shout out my boy Senegal. Nigerian woodlands, 1%. Southern Bantu people. So I got 1%. I'm on from the South. Eastern Bantu people. I was in the East as well. Shout out to my Eastern Bantu people. Hey, man, did you hear Kenya got it going on?
He's getting a lot of 1%.
Yeah,
and I haven't said this yet, but anything that's 1%, that means that we have a low confidence that it is a true reading from that area, especially considering when we have all of these other locations that correlate strongly to that. But yeah, a lot of 1% in his reading. So hopefully he'll show the full thing eventually.
That's it from this website here. I really enjoy the way they give you the information. So now let's go into my ancestry and see what we got going on in my ancestry. Boom. All right.
For 23andMe. So, the interesting thing to me is that he has 1,290 relatives with 2 close relatives, which I don't remember how they define close relatives, but I think a close relative is usually someone that's like a first cousin or closer sort of thing. First cousin, aunt, uncle, sibling, parent, grandparent, things like that. Maybe a little bit more distant too or something, but yeah, not too much more distant than that.
Interestingly enough, though, for both websites, you can download the raw data sheet of your DNA and have it being processed from a third-party website. You can download from this website or My Ancestry and go to My Heritage, and there's a section there where you can upload your information and they can give you some analysis of that information as well.
The biggest thing, you get more DNA matches. My Heritage, Family Tree DNA, GEDmatch, and Living DNA are the 4 big ones. There are other sites you can upload to as well. Not as much there, but the biggest thing is to think about if you're looking for DNA matches, you need to look in every database possible, because the one database that you might not have looked in may be the database that you just so happen to have that one relative test and you didn't know it, and that's the only place they test, and that means you completely miss it. So that's the big reason why you want to get on as many databases as possible.
All right, there you go.
We get the full thing.
As you can see, my real name is being displayed.
I just realized for the ancestry readings, we didn't see any Native American, unless I missed it, but I'm pretty sure we didn't see any Native American. But one thing to also consider with these DNA tests is there's a lot of your ancestry that's not in your DNA. You only get 50% of your dad's DNA and you only get 50% of your mom's DNA. So there's a whole 50% of your dad's DNA you don't get and a whole 50% of your mom's DNA you don't get. And on GEDmatch, they even have a tool where if you've done a DNA test and both of your parents have done a DNA test, you can create what's known as an evil twin. And what that is where they take the DNA that you didn't inherit from both of your parents and create a fake profile with that. Not really useful, in my opinion. I don't know if there's much use of it. If anyone knows a good use of the evil twin tool, let me know. But just an interesting way to think of it. But also, all of your grandparents, your parents only inherited 50% of that, and you only get 25%. So from each one of your grandparents, there's about 75% of their DNA that you don't inherit. So if you don't get an ancestry that you're expecting, if it's at a very deep level, so if he did his family tree and found a Native American ancestor that was a 6th great grandparent, he still may not get any Native American DNA because that DNA may have been phased out through recombination.
This particular website actually chooses to break down the percentages based off of continent. We have here sub-Saharan African, 86.5% sub-Saharan African. Okay, so West African, I'm 70% West African. To include Nigeria, right? Let me see if I can
all the same typical places.
So now this one's actually at a higher percentage. Interesting. Now, there's a reason why it's at a higher percentage. I'm going to explain why, because this website does things a little bit differently.
Before he explains it, I'm going to say my piece, and we'll see how much of it, he says. But there's a few reasons what's going on. Number one, each site is testing largely the same DNA markers, but not all. Each website is testing about 700,000 DNA markers, but some of those DNA markers that 23andMe is testing weren't tested on Ancestry, and Ancestry also tested DNA markers that weren't tested through 23andMe. So that's part of it. The second part, which is what I think he's going to discuss, is that these sites don't define the populations in the same way. On some site, they may lump things up slightly differently or call it something different. So on one site, you might get it called only Iberian, and they just lump Portuguese and Spanish into the Iberian reading, whereas on another site, you might have a specific Portuguese reading and a specific Spanish reading. And then in Africa, you may get something similar where you get readings where they read specifically Nigeria, but then if you look at the other site, Nigeria is only lumped in with a reading of others. So like this reading, Ghanaian, Liberian, and Sierra Leonean, well, Sierra Leonean is lumped in with this reading of Ghanaian and Liberian, but you might go on another website and Sierra Leonean is a reading unto itself. And so that's another part of it. And then of course, there's other things going on with this as well in terms of not just how they're defining the population groups, but kind of how they're defining the studies to be correlated to what population groups, what studies are unique to the company that the other companies don't have. So each company is always trying to do different studies to maybe get it where they have a better reading on this area or that area.
24.5% Ghanaian, Ghana. What's up, Ghana? Liberian, Sierra Leone. What's up, my peoples? What's going on? You got right here, I am 1.7% Senegana and Guinean. I apologize if I say the name wrong, guys. I apologize for that. Broadly West African, 1.7. So it's just giving me like all these different areas and just smashing it up together. All right. What I wanted to mention is this particular website, they give you an estimate based off of different percentages. And then let me see if I can find it right here. So this is a part of the website I wanted to talk about.
Yes,
so
the chromosome painting, which gives a beautiful breakdown, but even more, I hope he talks about this part right here where you can increase the accuracy. What do they call it exactly? Because accuracy is a specific statistical analysis, and I don't know if this is it, but yeah, the confidence of their prediction. So you increase it from 50%, which is speculative, which that's the standard, is what you get is a 50%. You can increase it all the way up to 90%, which is conservative, which when you do that, what you'll notice is the more granular breakdown readings usually will then disappear and be lumped into the much more generalized readings. And so especially like if he increases it to 90% conservative, my guess is his broadly West African will become like a huge chunk.
When it comes to 23andMe, they actually tell you where you're from based off of predictions. However, you can change the confident range. So if you want to see a different result in terms of what they're most confident about, you go up to here, and then
just like I said, that broadly West African went up to 42.9%. And that's why it does that, is because when they're doing these readings, it can be, well, it seems most likely to be Nigerian, but if we want to be really, really accurate, it's really just generally West African. And in a sense, this is kind of 23andMe's version of what Ancestry does with the ranges, where they say, 18% Liberian, but really a range of 11 to 21% or whatever it is. And here they're doing it in confidence. So it's just the site's kind of doing it in a different way of trying to give more nuance to things. It's trying to break all of that down into something that's easily digestible by the typical consumer. They still want to add these tools like this so that people that do want to dive in maybe a bit more in depth can try to get a better understanding. And then they also release what's known as white papers. So here you can see scientific details page, but basically white paper is just a writing out of the breakdown of how they come up with their results and how everything is working. And so you can get in the white papers to get an even better understanding of how are they coming up with all of this.
Now, am I Nigerian? They don't know really.
At a 90% confidence, it's not enough to be able to decipher what part of West Africa. And that's one of the reasons why when I talk about these DNA tests, or whenever you hear most people talk about these DNA tests, the confidence is much greater when you're at a higher level of region. So continentally, you can be very confident. Then regionally, the confidence goes down a bit. And then as you get more local and more nuanced, the confidence goes down greatly. And that's why when you see sites that have really, really nuanced results, it can sometimes throw a question mark in of how well are they actually getting that nuance. This video is going to end up being so damn long.
But it says 6% is telling us perhaps you have a lot, some Nigerian backdrop, right? But we'll go back to this way.
Yeah, go through 50%.
So let's get back to my ancestry composition right here. So shout out to my West African people. I don't know why they have it like separated like this. So like Congolese and then here again.
Well, here, the Congolese and Southern East African is the regional reading, and then the three below it, Angolan and Congolese, the Southern East African, and the broadly Congolese and Southern East African, those are sub-regions of the Congolese and Southern East African reading. So that's what's going on there. So I think what's throwing him off is because he has the Congolese and Southern East African open. If he were to close that, I think it'd probably make more sense how it's kind of, sectioned off, bulleted.
Angolian, Congolesian, 12%. There you go. Broadly Congolesian. It's just how they break it down right here, I guess.
Yep.
Okay, so now my European side.
Now, the European is very interesting in that the breakdown's not too different from what Ancestry had. So from what I remember, his Ancestry was 4% Germanic Europe, 4% Portuguese, and then was it 3% Irish or something like that? And then there might have been something else, but basically, it was about it was about 12-15%. Here we're getting 13.1%, but a little bit less, but still kind of the same general breakdown. British and Irish, 3.6%, French and German, 2.4%. A little less than the Germanic Europe, but broadly Northwestern European 3.8%, so more than likely part of that's falling in that broadly Northwestern Europe. But even more interesting is the fact that he's also still getting 2.5% Southern European with 1.3% of that coming from Spanish and Portuguese. So they're lumping Spanish and Portuguese here, whereas Ancestry had Portugal as its own thing, and then we're also getting the broadly Southern European as well, but I think we could assume that there is a possibility that broadly Southern European may be tied to the Spanish and Portuguese together, and that could represent a Portuguese ancestor. Even though Ancestry did say Portugal for their reading, still could be Spanish or a mixture of Portuguese and Spanish either way. But just very interesting that it's all very similar, but you can see how the percentages are slightly off, but not enough to change up what the general assumption would be of where that ancestry is coming from. So let's assume maybe that the Irish ancestry is coming from one specific ancestor, the Germanic Europe is coming from a separate specific ancestor, and then the Portuguese is coming from a third specific ancestor. And if that's the case, then what we'd be looking at with all of those is that we're looking at about a third great grandparent, maybe a fourth great grandparent, maybe even a second great grandparent. So if we were able to build out Ace's family tree completely, find all of the second great grandparents, all the third great grandparents, all of the fourth great grandparents, we might find 3 or 4 in about that generation, which If we're looking at third, fourth, second great grandparents, we're looking at people born as early as the, early mid 1700s to people born as late as the late 1800s. So it's all fallen kind of in line. Now, it doesn't mean that's what the thing is going to be, that it's going to be three separate ancestors. Could actually be that maybe he has one European ancestor who's a great grandparent, because 13% would be equivalent of a great grandparent, and all of it's coming from that great grandparent. I highly doubt it, though. More than likely, he's getting European from both sides, one, from mom and from dad, and they likely have different ones, but having his parents test would be really interesting to see what the breakdown is even further. And that would be what I'd suggest more than anything if he especially wants to try to use this to expand his family tree.
My white side of the family. Shout out to my British and Irish people. Now, this I kind of figured I would have, because my grandmother's father apparently comes from France. I don't know if he comes from France or someone comes from France.
If it's his grandmother's father, that's a great grandparent, which would be the equivalent of about 12.5%, and not 2.4%. So, if he's truly has a purely European great-grandfather, granted maybe the great-grandfather came from France but wasn't just European, because there obviously are a lot of people with African ancestry who live throughout Europe, and there have been people with African ancestry living in Europe for hundreds upon hundreds of years. But with his understanding of saying, from France here, the thing that he really should be considering is that it could be French, could be German, but either way, that could be correlated to what we got on Ancestry as that Germanic Europe. So even though Ancestry is saying Germanic Europe, maybe it is French and not Germanic or German necessarily, but France is technically part of that Germanic Europe, and that's why they call it Germanic Europe and not just Germany.
So broader Northwest European, all right. Southern European, here we go. So Southern European, Portugal, Spain, Italia. Okay, is that Romania in the building right there?
Now, I should say here, this doesn't mean that his DNA is coming from all of these places. It just means that the DNA could be coming from any of these places.
Trace Ancestry. There's one called Trace Ancestry. We detected traces of the following population in your DNA.
Basically, trace, it's so small that they think it could be there, but the confidence is really, really low that it's true, and there's a high possibility it's a misread. And with having that Southern European, Levantine has a connection, obviously through the Mediterranean connection, and thus that may be where that reading's coming from, is that it's just kind of a misreading off of whatever Southern European ancestry he has, which I think the indication is most likely Iberian, based on the fact that he is getting a Spanish and Portuguese reading here, and the reading on Ancestry was Portugal as well.
I don't know what Levantine.
So the Levant, basically, where Israel is.
means. What does Levantine mean? Okay. Oh, where are we? Where is Levantine? We are in... It's true! Somebody get Kodak Black! It's true! It's true!
See, I don't know what he's referencing with Kodak Black.
Now.
Hopefully not the Black Hebrew Israelite stuff or something like that.
They don't want you to know that.
But 0.4% trace results. This could be representative of super distant ancestry within the past 400 or 500 years when I say that. So, super distant, I'm not talking 2,000 years. Super distant, I'm talking like, okay, maybe this is coming, if it is true, maybe it's coming from like a 6th great-grandparent or a 7th great-grandparent or an 8th great-grandparent. Basically meaning someone from living sometime in the like 1600s or so, maybe even 1500s or 1700s or so, but around that time. And that's if it is even true.
What's next? Additional ancestry regions, Caribbean. Ah! That's where we at with it.
So what this part is looking at the DNA matches, similar to what Ancestry did. And basically on 23andMe, they don't have trees that they connect to, but what they have is they have it where you can put in where was your paternal grandmother born, was your paternal grandfather born, where's your maternal grandmother, maternal grandfather born, and where were other ancestral locations. And then doing a similar thing of looking at all these matches and seeing where they say they're from. They find something consistent, like here for him, a lot of DNA matches that are probably listing Haiti. Thus, they list this as one of their communities, their genetic groups.
I took this particular test, both of these tests, and actually my mom did the same, right? We sent the information out same day. Anyways, with this one, this test on 23andMe, my mom had some similar. Obviously, it wouldn't be the same, obviously, but she had some Native American DNA. It was a small trace as well. So as you can see, my mom has way more European connections and everything like that. And then we can move all the way down here. And then we can see traces as well. She has trace.
So trace result, 0.4%. Big question mark about whether or not it is a true reading or a misread. If it is a true reading, it could be as close as maybe like a third or fourth great grandparent, which I think that not quite as possible. More than likely, I think we'd probably be looking at like a fifth great grandparent, maybe sixth great grandparent, but could be even more distant. So, that's the other thing with lower readings is if they are true, you have an even larger range of what that possible relationship could be. It could even be, an eighth or ninth or 10th great grandparent, and it just had what's known as a sticky segment, which it's not like a sticky segment is something that certain DNA gets stuck or whatever. It's just that over time, as DNA recombines, sometimes just certain parts of the DNA don't get recombined with each generation. And so his mom might have inherited a 0.4% reading that just was an unrecombined segment that went for much longer than you would expect. But if it is true, then we're looking at, someone born at best, because we're looking at his mom's third great grandparents as being the closest. So at best, maybe someone born in the early 1800s or late 1700s, but more than likely an ancestor born somewhere between the 1500s and the early 1800s would be the range. So the way to figure out how possible is this to be true, if his grandparents are available to do DNA testing, getting them to test, because if it's true, one of them should also get the Indigenous American. And then also looking at DNA matches of yours through known sides. If he has a bunch of cousins of his through his mom's side who've done DNA testing as well, and you look at their results and they're also getting this Indigenous American reading, maybe that's a good indication it's true. And even more, that can help indicate what side it's through. So maybe it's, your mom's father's sibling who had kids that DNA tested and they're getting these readings. And then, okay, well, maybe that's the side it's through.
When it comes to DNA, it can show you basically your breakdown of your DNA, but it can't show you your full lineage of ancestry. It won't be able to do that, right? Somewhere in my mom's DNA shows that she has some Native American ancestry.
Possible Native American ancestry.
Meaning there was a Native American who was directly my mom's, connected to my mom's DNA.
Meaning there was possibly, we have to remember, we don't know 100% for sure. We can't take these tests as 100% accurate. There's a reason why it's an estimation, but even more knowing that trace result. So he's right, but he's not 100% right.
Now, that's my mom's ancestor. And since that's my mom, that's also my ancestor as well.
True. If there is a Native American ancestor in his mom's lineage, then it is his ancestor as well, but not all of your ancestors are also your genetic ancestors.
There's no debate about it. I know how people can be like, point something percent. Come on. But you just got to think about it. Once you learn more about DNA and how we are created. When it comes to DNA, you are half of your parents' DNA.
I don't know what he's going to get into, but the party said, the 0.4%, come on. You need to understand DNA more, then you'll be more confident, which I disagree. I say the opposite. As you understand the DNA more, and the issues of phasing the DNA, the issues of the misreads. You have all these different steps where there can be errors. You have the extraction of the DNA, you have the amplification of the DNA, you have the reading of the DNA, so reading all of the markers, then you have the analyzation of the markers. So each of those steps, there's all these things that can go on, and just in the reading of the 700,000 markers, there's a typical 1% margin of error. So if there's a 1% margin of error, it would lead to reason that any percentage is less than 1%, the confidence is at a low amount that makes it so we do understand that it may not be true. Let's say her parents are around, his grandparents are around and do a DNA test. They may get tested and neither of them get the reading of Indigenous American, or even more, that happens and an update happens a little later on where then the mom's Indigenous American all of a sudden disappears.
So this actually gives my mom's ancestral timeline. So as far as back as possible, all right? And so
this is one of the tools that I see misread in videos more than any other tool. And what it's trying to do is do what I've been doing where I say like, okay, we can estimate it's about a third great grandparent, and third great grandparents for people of this generation would be born around, late 1700s to early 1800s. Well, that's kind of what they're doing here. So, this is generation. So this first one right here, which his face is blocking, is generation 1. So parents, then generation back 2 grandparents, then 3 great grandparents. And you can see the 1870, that's about the generalized when they would have been born. So depending on what age that he's putting here, so it looks like they're doing 30-year generations. So, that would put, grandparents born about 1900, his parents born about 1930. So, oh wait, sorry, this is for his mom. I forgot. So this makes more sense. So, his mom's mom, so his grandparent would be right here. So his mom's born about 1960, his grandparents born about 1930, great grandparent born about 1900, third great grandparent born about 1870, fourth great grandparent born about 1840, blah, blah, blah. But what this is really saying is if this DNA is coming from one recent ancestor, then this is about where we would expect it. But what this doesn't tell you is that it may not be that close. It may be much more distant where you're finding that ancestry because it's not coming from one recent ancestor. It's coming from multiple more distant ancestors. Let's say that, you're looking at your grandparents and you have 2 grandparents that are Spanish and then another grandparent that's African and another grandparent that's Asian. Well, it's going to look like you're 50% Spanish which would be the equivalent of a parent, but it's not your parent that was Spanish. It was 2 grandparents on both sides. It's just that both of your parents were half Spanish. So when you would look at this chart, it would show you the parent as being the Spanish spot, but we know that it's not, it's a grandparent. And so we need to think of that in a much more distant way. So, you may get 12% of a reading, which would be the equivalent of a great-grandparent, but it might not be coming from a great-grandparent. It might be coming from a second great-grandparent on your mom's side and a second great-grandparent on your dad's side, or maybe 2 third great-grandparents on your mom's side and 2 third great-grandparents on your dad's side. This is where a lot of people get thrown off on this because they look at this and they go, okay, so this is when I had an ancestor with that ancestry living. And this, and it's like, no, this is just giving you an estimation of if this is coming from one ancestor. So, like the Guinean, Liberian, Sierra Leonean, it looks like it's covering basically from the, generation 1 all the way up to generation 4, basically saying, you likely have a lot of ancestors who that's where that ancestry is coming from all of your recent ancestry. But then when we see all these further ones like the Indigenous American, which I'm pretty sure he's going to talk about, what this is showing you is if it is coming from one recent ancestor, it could be as recent as an ancestor born about 1810. So like I said, the earliest being the early 1800s, but could be as far back as you see here, 8 plus they have. So they show 1690, but remember that 8 plus. So, it goes 8 plus. So much further. That's also assuming that the readings are correct. And of course, we know the readings may not be correct. There's a lot of issues going on with the readings and the 0.4%. We know it's traced. So hopefully all of that makes sense, but let's see what his breakdown of this is. And gosh, this video is going to end up being so damn long.
So when you click here, you can see this is the more recent. So it says most likely, if you read it right here, it says right here, you most likely had a grandparent, parent, or second grandparent who was 100%, right? Ghanaian or Liberian or Sierra Leone. This person was likely born between 1840 and 1900.
But in reality, we know that's most likely not true because, for one, the slave trade was illegal at that point. And so there were slaves still being brought over, but very rarely because it was illegal. Basically meaning the possibility that he had a purely Ghanaian ancestor born about 1840 seems very unlikely. And more likely what's happening is he has Ghanaian, Liberian, and Sierra Leonean ancestry through multiple lines of his family that are adding up to this larger amount, and because it's such a large amount, it seems to correlate like that. But if he were to try to find an ancestor, the closest ancestor that would be 100% from one of those areas, my guess is you'd have to go much further back. But it's just that he does have so much distant ancestry connected to these areas that it adds up to make it look like it's much closer.
And to give you perspective, Haiti got their independence in 1804. So the idea of that being true is true, right? Because Haiti had a lot of enslaved people, so that idea is true.
Were people that were 100% from those areas coming over to Haiti around the mid-1800s, because that's what we would be expecting if this is true. But like I said, I don't think it would be that recent. I think a truly 100% ancestor would have been much further back. But I think this is why this tool annoys me more than anything, is because I think it gives a lot of false hope to people, and I think it causes more confusion than help with anything that it gives.
So before I leave, I wanted to showcase something right here. You see this right here? This is a list of my ancestor birthplaces, all right? So if I click this, it actually shows me some of my ancestors, some of them who live in these particular countries. So I have ancestors, I have around 384 ancestors that live in the United States.
So actually, what he is saying here is completely wrong. What he's looking at right now is he's looking at the match page, the relative matches. And what he's looking at, ancestor birthplaces, it's not the birthplaces of his ancestors. This is a filter to say, show me people where they say their ancestors' birthplaces were the United States, Haiti, United Kingdom. This isn't saying, oh, he has 384 ancestors from the United States, and he clicks it and he gets all this info on 384 of his ancestors. No, this is saying he has 384 matches that have said that they have ancestry in the United States, and so if he clicks it, it filters that match list down. This is what are his matches saying in terms of where they're from.
States. These are distant relatives, actually. 47 in Haiti, United Kingdom 44. I'm actually in the United Kingdom. So I'm going to see if I can try to reach out to one of them and make a video out of it, or maybe...
And it doesn't even mean that that's where they're living, it just means that's where they're saying they have an ancestor from.
In Ireland, we'll see. The sky's the limit. I even got family in Colombia, distant family members.
Okay, that was a decently good video. I don't want to call it great. It started out great, and slowly over time, I kind of got a little like, oh, okay, this is a bit much. I think the biggest thing was just that, you know, there was a lot of silliness and kind of goofing around that added a lot of extra time. And this was already a 45-minute and 58-second long video, and it's been 2 hours of me recording because I talk, you know, and so this has been a long video. So this one's been a little difficult towards the end here. As well, towards the end, it seems that a lot of his understanding of the DNA test became much less. Like, he started out really great understanding of stuff, and then as time went on, there were certain things that kind of I didn't really agree with completely. I'm not going to go into all of that. Obviously, if you've gotten to this point, you've already seen me say all of that, or you just skipped it all and you're at this point. But hopefully, he does get in touch with me. I would certainly love to work with him in terms of helping understand this stuff better, but also building out the tree, finding these relatives, and maybe identifying some of those European cousins of his that he's interested in connecting with. But maybe we can even work on this Native American and see how likely is it? Do we have a better confidence in it if we look at things further? And can we do stuff to maybe see that? Or can we look into things and possibly prove that, okay, this seems even less likely to be true? But I do have to give serious props for the fact that he started out with the DNA matches, and I'm lucky if people even talk about DNA matches, but to start out with that and lead off, that's the power of the DNA test, and that's probably going to be the part that's seen most by people that watch his video, because most of the time when people talk about DNA matches, it's at the end of the video, and that's when most people have gone away. So Awesome job on that. Now, if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more reactions of mine just like this, be sure to click on this one right here. Thank you to my Patreon patrons and YouTube members.